Hello and welcome to Follow Me and Die. I'm your host, Larry Hamilton, and today on Roll20 for the Absolute Beginner, Advanced Fog of War and Dynamic Lighting. They are both paid features that are not available in the free version. They are available to both tiers of the paid version. I purchased a month pro subscription because I ran a couple of games for GaryCon, the virtual GaryCon, and one of those games I decided I wanted to do some dynamic lighting. I dug into that. It's not hard, it's not complicated, so I wanted to share a bit about that particular paid feature, and maybe that'll help you decide whether or not the expense of Roll20 is worth it for these two features alone. I tend to be more of a theater of a mind sort of game master, so I don't spend a lot of time on maps and using all the fancy things that you can do in Roll20. I have done that on occasion. I find for me it's a lot more work spent doing a map when I could be thinking out the scenario or planning another scenario while I'm instead of messing with the map and the lighting. It's not hard to do. If that's something that is interesting to you, I want to show you how it works. So follow along, and if you have any questions, please share in the comments below. I will point out that earlier I did do a basic Fog of War video that I'll link in the show notes, and this will be the advanced Fog of War first, and then we'll go into the dynamic lighting. The first thing is you want to be sure that you have a map that you want to work with and that you think it through a little bit, because your map will need to have walls for the rooms or structures of your dungeon or your buildings, and then however you do that, whether it be through drawing lines and boxes with the drawing tools within Roll20 or using art assets such as dungeon tiles or so forth. So first of all, we need to specify our map. We'll choose our map. We'll go to the gear icon, and we'll, for Fog of War, turn on Enable Advanced Fog of War. We can show the grid if we wish, dim light reveals, and there's an option that all tokens reveal if the Game Master token could reveal areas that others could see. So if you don't want the Game Master's NPCs to change things, don't mark that. Once you select it, you'll notice that the screen goes gray. This indicates on the Game Master layer that Fog of War is enabled and nothing is yet revealed. If we go to the players area, we have to make sure and use the player ribbon to move the player's view to the map that we're working with. And you go to the player's view, and when it updates, it's black because we've not given the ability to reveal any of the Fog of War to the player's token. So as the Game Master, you're the only one that can give a token sight or the ability to reveal anything. So you'll click on it and go to the gear, and if it's not on the Advanced tab, you'll need to go to the Advanced tab. For Advanced Fog of War, give it a range at which it will reveal, and let's just say 30 feet. I'm currently using the default 5-foot squares, and we get a map, or a square revealed on the map that is 30 feet across. Oddly, it is, you don't have a choice as to what it reveals. It's in a square shape, but as the token moves, and as we go to the player map, we'll see that what the player can see, and as the player moves, as you move one direction, the area becomes gray behind you. That indicates an area that you've been but cannot currently see. So if something's sneaking up behind you in the dark, you might hear it, but you can't see it. So you have to go back the other direction, and you can look and reveal more of the area. And as you move around, the area of gray gets larger and the area of black goes away. The black indicates areas you have not been and cannot see. So white is what you can see, gray is where you have been and what you've revealed, and you see a similar pattern on the Game Master view, that white is what the player can see, gray is where they have been, and the darker gray is where they haven't been yet and they don't know what's there. And so that's how the Advanced Fog of War differs. It's an automatic thing based on the token and the ability given to the token, whereas with the basic Fog of War, the Game Master has to reveal areas manually as they go by either drawing a square or rectangle shape or using the polygon tool. But as I mentioned, I discussed that in detail in a prior video. So now let's turn on dynamic lighting. Often it is used hand in hand with fog of war, so we'll enable it. We'll enforce line of sight. That means that the light can only go along the line of sight of the token, so you can't like see around corners with the light. Only update on drop is only when you drop a token on the map. Restrict movement. That means that the area that the dynamic lighting is contained, the players can't walk through the walls, so that limits them, and I'll show you where you need to be careful with that. Once you've established that and click OK, it updates the map, it resets the fog of war. The reason for that is we have not given the token the ability to see. So we have to go back and indicate that the token emits light. So if a token has dark vision or infravision or a magic item that only that player can see, you can indicate emits light if all player and has sight. If all players can see the light that that token has, then you'll put a check in all players see the light. So it has sight and emits light, and we'll do a 30 by 30, and when we click OK, suddenly the player will be able to see. And you notice the light reveals in a circular radius, whereas the fog of war is a square. I don't have an explanation for why they're different, just know they are, but the circle is smaller than the square, so you can't see the corners of the fog of war revealed area because the light is round. And as you move, the fog of war functions and the light functions at the same time, and the game master gets an update of changes in the shading, and on the player map you see as they move, area of the reveal of fog of war changes as they move in a more circular shape. Because of the darkness, they can't see beyond the range of the light. And so that is before you start adding structures and drawing the dynamic light barriers. So you'll notice that there are some extra tools. There's this tool on the toolbar are some special effects. I touched on that a little bit on the video I did last Friday on Twitch. But if you go to the layers, in addition to the regular map and background, object and token, and GM layer, there's now the dynamic lighting layer. The dynamic lighting layer is a special layer where you use the drawing tools within Roll20 to indicate the boundaries of the light. We will choose that layer and we'll draw some shapes, and well, first we'll go to the map and token layer and put our map, and then we'll come back to the dynamic lighting layer and draw our shapes to indicate where sight lines go. So we'll go to the map layer, we'll choose to draw a shape, we'll do a square. To do a square, you can hold the shift key and drag and it will snap to the grid. I'm just going to draw a box here, and then to draw like corridors, use the polygon lines, and if you hold the shift key, you click and then hold the shift key and click again, it'll draw a straight line. As long as you are wanting contiguous lines, you can do that. To stop it from drawing, you need to remember to hit the shift key or click the right mouse button or click a different button on the toolbar or click somewhere else on the screen so it deactivates the tool. Otherwise you'll get lines going clear across the page that you don't want, which you'll see me do that a couple of times. So here we're drawing say a four-way corridor, quick and simple, just using the line tools. And when you're doing this, you'll want to keep in mind that the lines that you draw on the dynamic lighting layer will need to be outside the walls so that the players see the walls. That may be a little tricky to do on this. Basically, you'll draw your map either using the basic tools built into the drawing functionality of Roll20, or you can use your different map and token tools. And when you build a map, say a dungeon, and you've got your dungeon tiles and you've got walls, you want to make sure that you've got everything lined up. And when you draw your dynamic lighting information, you want to be sure that you don't have any gaps in the dynamic lighting information. So I'm just going to skip ahead while we do this quick and dirty map. So once you've got your map drawn, you want to go back to the dynamic lighting layer, and Roll20 recommends that you use lime green for the walls in dynamic lighting so that it stands out and it's easier to tell apart from your walls. and that you use red for doors. For those that might be colorblind, I'm not sure how those colors are going to work. You're going to have to figure out what works best for you, because I'm not colorblind. I don't know what to recommend there. So you'll choose your lime green and draw the walls. I've got a box with no openings in it, so I'm going to use the box tool to draw a box around the box. So I choose the shape tool and draw my shape, and then I'll do the shapes using the line tool for all the others. And let me skip ahead while I do that. Also, I want to just make a box here that doesn't have a room or walls to go with it to illustrate that. So once you get all your walls drawn, you're going to want to use red for the doors, and there's a couple different ways to do that. You can just draw a line, or you can do a box, however works best for you. The thing you have to keep in mind is you want the line to cross the green lines of the walls so that it totally blocks the light. If you don't, there will be gaps, and in those gaps players can either see, and if they're big enough gaps, they can actually drag their token into areas that you don't want them. You want to allow yourself time after you build your dynamic lighting layer, after you've built your map, to test it with just grab a player token and place it and make sure that there aren't any gaps where you don't want gaps, and that the players can't walk through areas you don't want them to walk through. Once you have your map ready to go, when the players start wandering around, for the doors, there's a couple different ways you can remove them. You could right click on the door, and you have to be on the dynamic lighting layer to do this. You could click on the door and right click it and send it to another layer, but the problem is no matter what layer you send it to, there is no way to send back to the dynamic lighting layer from one of the other layers. So the door is no longer usable. The other way would be to delete the door, which leads to the same issue as moving it to another layer. You'd end up having to redraw it or Control Z to bring it back. Or you could click and drag the door to a part of the map that represents solid walls or where the players can't see. And you notice here I'm having some problems with the map because Roll20 was very sluggish. I imagine it's under a heavy load tonight as I was recording this, so things weren't responding well. One thing to keep in mind is when things start acting weird in Roll20 is first try to refresh either with the F5 key on your keyboard or the refresh button on your browser. If that doesn't work, closing your browser and going back in would be the next best thing. Sometimes you even have to change your browser. So I had to change to a different map that already had dynamic lighting in order to get it to work tonight. So we're going to see another change in my map abruptly here. Okay, now I've chosen a different map that I had dynamic lighting built before. You want to reset the fog of war in your testing. So as soon as you're done testing the map, remember to reset the fog of war. That's the little fog icon on the toolbar, and reset it. And if you do something and change something, you'll want to reset it so you can make sure that you've indeed fixed it. Because as the game master, you don't always see things the way the players do, so you'll want to check it as the player view. Here you see a round shape that they can't see through. That's because there is a shape on the dynamic lighting layer blocking the light. And you notice it's sort of round. You can't draw a circle with the circle tool on the dynamic lighting layer. So to do the round shape, you have to do short lines using the polygon tool. It takes patience and persistence to get it to be roughly round. And I had to reset fog of war several times in this example due to the sluggish behavior of Roll20 when I recorded this. I apologize for quality of this video based on multiple factors, and at some point in the future I'm sure I'll redo this, but I just wanted to get this out there so I can get the information out, and I'll worry about making it prettier in the future. So here is the Game Master. I've dragged the player into a room that doesn't have any doors and it has dynamic lighting, but they can't leave. So this would represent a room that a door closes behind them, or some other trap is sprung, or they're teleported somewhere without any doors. And as you can see here from the player view, players can't see anything but the black of the walls around them. As a game master, you can move them wherever you want, but the players can't go through the walls if you have not left any gaps in the walls on the dynamic lighting layer. So think of the lines on the dynamic lighting layer as a mirror image of the walls that limit the light. And without the light limiting walls on the dynamic lighting layer, there are no limits imposed by the walls. Players can just go wherever they want because the map is basically just a underlayment under them, and they're like walking on a grid map, miniatures on a grid map, and you don't have anything to stop them from moving around, whereas the dynamic lighting enforces the walls. So in a situation where you've got this, you either have to delete the entire square around them, or you have to move them yourself. And one thing you see here is I had switching between the player tab and the GM tab. It lost track of the GM tab and I had to reload it. So now that you can see the dynamic lighting, it is white in the midst of the gray on the GM layer and white in the midst of black on the player layer, and the shape of the walls is revealed. And if you go to the GM layer, you can see different things. Now if there were no black walls here, the players wouldn't be able to see the black walls on their layer, but it would still act like the same shape because of the dynamic lighting square in the same area. So when you walk around, the light reveals within the line of sight. That's why there are straight lines when you get to a corner. And as the player moves, any little deformity. And of course it's hidden behind my picture here. Sorry about that, but there's gaps between the door and the wall so the player can see through that. And if the gaps are big enough, the player token can actually walk through that gap. So that's why you want to test your map to make sure there aren't any such gaps, unless there is some effect you're going for that you want gaps in the wall that they can see through but not go through. And then you'll notice I've drug the doors off to the side from different areas, so I've got them to move back if I wish. And again, everything you do on the dynamic lighting layer has to be done on the dynamic lighting layer. If you want to make changes like move a door so that players can go through, but you do have to be on the dynamic lighting layer to make any changes that affects the way the light moves on the map. One cool effect you can do is pillars and columns, and you can draw an X shape. You can't use the letter X, letters don't work, but you can draw the shape of an X inside graphic representing a pillar or a column or some other object that's big enough that you don't want players to see the other side of or around, and it will give a cool effect. You see that here. In addition to the map, you'll have to do the dynamic lighting if you're building your own maps. Some modules that you can buy, for example, Tomb of Annihilation, the maps in Tomb of Annihilation have dynamic lighting. I was helping someone with that particular campaign, and they wanted to add dynamic lighting to areas that it didn't exist. So that's something to keep in mind. If you want dynamic lighting everywhere it makes sense to logically have control of the light and so forth, then the dynamic lighting that is built into maps of scenarios you buy may not be enough for your taste, and you may want to spend time doing that. So whether you do your maps from scratch or purchase maps with built-in dynamic lighting, you're going to want to make sure you take time to test it. Remember to reset the Fog of War after testing it so that it's ready to go for the game. Just be patient with it. It takes a little bit of fiddling to get it working. The more complex your map, the more issues you can have. When Roll20 is particularly busy, there will be a lot of strain and load on the system that could delay things, especially if you're trying to have two different tabs open to test things like you saw with my example here. I ran into that problem. So you want to make sure that you allow yourself enough time to get ready for your session and not try to rush, because there's enough delicate fiddling that you've got to do with dynamic lighting, that you can't do a rush job and expect it to look as cool as you want. But there are some cool effects you can get. It just takes practice and seeing what works. So I hope you found this helpful. I appreciate any comments down below for clarification. I'll be glad to answer those. As I mentioned, in the future I want to redo this so that I don't have all the issues that I ran into with this one, but this should at least answer the most basic questions to get you started. I hope you're all safe, well, and sheltered, and getting along well with those you live with. And if you live alone, I hope you are able to get connected with other people through the internet. And as always, game on.